This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
I'm really pleased to be joined by Brent Zwerneman, who of the Houston Chronicle. For those that name might ring a bell, Brent was the one that broke open the story of Texas and Oklahoma joining the league at SEC Media Days 2 years ago. And Brent, I know that probably seems like a lifetime ago, but it's still seeing an impact today. We appreciate you making some time for us. You also broke the story of Conner Weigman being out for the season earlier this week for the Houston Chronicle. What kind of impact do you think that will have on the Aggies, not just this season, but particularly tomorrow against Arkansas?
Hey, first I got to say, y'all's timing is impeccable. I just dropped off the last kid just within minutes ago at Bryan High School, and here's what y'all will get a kick out of. It's homecoming at Bryan High, and so I'm pulling up. He's a freshman, plays baseball there, freshman. The dance team happens to be walking out of a door right at in all their gear and all their garb and everything, headed for the football field. He looks at me with the big look of panic on his face, and he's like, "Duck," or what? I'm like, "I'm in the driver's seat. I can't duck," And anyway, so the dance team walked by the cars. I'm letting him out, so that was quite a moment. And then I get to visit with y'all. But yeah, that does seem like a lifetime ago. And I tell the young journalists that all stemmed from me doing a 10-year anniversary story of Bowen Lofton, then A&M's president, saying at that time on July 21st, 2011, the Big 12 is in a state of uncertainty. And I'm like, okay, that's about 10 years ago. I need to look up some of these old people. And then, boom, on the 10-year to the day is when that Texas OU story broke, because I was doing an anniversary story of the previous announcement of A&M, trying to get out of the Big 12 for the SEC. And then this week, in terms of, you mentioned Conner Weigman, Bobby Petrino was high on Max Johnson as it was going into the summer. I kept hearing that over and over, that he really liked even though Conner Weigman is the five-star guy with a very high ceiling, he also loved what Max Johnson brought to the table. And, usually you roll your eyes if a coach says something like, well, I've got two starting quarterbacks. So I actually believe Jimbo Fisher on that one, because we've seen what Max Johnson can do. He was a starter at LSU 2 years ago. He beat the Aggies. And he started last year, broke his hand on a Mississippi State player's helmet. I guess beat Arkansas. That was quite a game last year. He was the starting quarterback then. And so now he's back. So they don't feel like all is lost with Conner Weigman out for the season with that broken foot.
And when you look at the offense, when you look at those two differences, you mentioned, again, Petrino being high on him. How does he cater the offense more to Johnson starting tomorrow? Are there less shots downfield? What do you see differently moving forward, even though he still has confidence in him?
Yeah, I think they feel a little more comfortable, even though Conner Weigman was presented as a dual-threat guy. He had been a little bit susceptible to injury. He had been susceptible to injury in high school, and then, of course, that kind of reared its ugly head again. I do think they feel more comfortable that Max Johnson, as he showed last week against Auburn, that if he needs to tuck and run it, he can get some yards in that sense, and that maybe he's just a little bit more of a veteran presence out there, a guy, and obviously the son of Brad Johnson, the former Super Bowl winning quarterback, and it's kind of in his blood to be a guy who can direct an offense, and he's a natural leader and so forth. So it's really no knock on Weigman. It's just Weigman was still really young. I mean, as a true sophomore who had a few games under his belt last year. I think that the experience of running Bobby Petrino's offense probably comes into play here a little bit more. And it's funny, I told Max Johnson this when we visited with him last week. I said, I've seen a lot of things in this business. I've never actually seen a guy go backward in eligibility, but somehow he managed that. Last year he was listed as a junior. This year he's listed as a sophomore because in the offseason the family decided to take advantage of that COVID year. What's funny, 2 years ago when he beat the Aggies while at LSU in Baton Rouge, he was a sophomore. He's a sophomore again 2 years later running the Aggies offense. It's just a weird deal. But, again, I think A&M, if they were having to turn to Jalen Henderson, who is now Max Johnson's backup, there'd be a lot more unknowns, but they do feel a little bit more uncomfortable. Comfortable, and with the idea that people all assumed it was Conner Weigman's job going into August in camp. I was hearing everything else that, it was actually a very tight battle, and Bobby Petrino actually really loved Max Johnson as well.
Brent Zwerneman with us on the McClarty-Daniel hotline. Let's talk about that Aggie defense. Really got after Auburn last week. I think, 15 tackles for loss. What are you expecting from the Aggie front against the Razorbacks, who have had some troubles along the way on their offensive line?
Yeah, that surprised us all that cover A&M, because they had really had trouble. They've got a load of there was a span of about a decade where I could count the number of five-star recruits A&M had across the board on both sides of the ball. And suddenly you've got like 6 or 7 five-star guys on the defensive line alone. The problem with that, and that's not really a problem, but they're all kind of built similarly. You didn't really have kind of that speed edge rusher type guy, and you still don't. They're trying to turn Shamar Turner into that. And so that had been the issue early on, where you say, okay, you've got all these five-star defensive linemen, but they're all kind of bull rushers, guys more impactful in the middle than maybe getting out on the edge. That seemed to change. They brought Edgerrin Cooper, the outside linebacker, and he had a couple of sacks. They collected 7 sacks against Auburn. It really kind of threw us for a loop, because you did not see that against Miami. They weren't really able to pressure Tyler Van Dyke much, and of course he ate them alive. So we were saying if anybody's been sandbagging so far this year for the Aggies, it's been defensive coordinator DJ Durkin, because the aggressiveness on defense that the Aggies showed against Auburn in the SEC opener, we had not seen that until that time. Again, linebacker was their biggest question on defense going into the season. Edgerrin Cooper, who's a veteran guy, has played well. I mentioned him with a couple of sacks. Torian York is a true freshman who's kind of helped quarterbacking that defense, and he's played above his rating, I'll put it that way, as a 3-star guy who stepped right into a starting role and has excelled there. So linebacker has actually been kind of a pleasant surprise for the Aggies, at least so far, 4 games into the season.
What is the view from the Aggie fan base, or just around the program? Alabama at least has appeared to be down a little bit, although their defense may have reawakened last weekend. LSU has the loss to Florida State. A&M's got the loss to Miami. What's kind of the expectation the rest of the way, and what does A&M feel like their place is in the SEC West right now?
Yeah, I know they felt a whole lot better before they went into week 2, and then just get sautéed at Miami, give up 48 points, and then they're had the approach that, hey, all is lost, and Jimbo Fisher's in his 6th season. But going back to your point, with it seeming like a little more of a down year across the board for the SEC West, they're suddenly realizing, well, even though they have that non-conference loss by 15 points, they still, believe it or not, can be in the mix here, and if they can get their defense going. And now they've gone a couple of games, 2 straight games without allowing a defensive touchdown. One was Louisiana Monroe, so you take that into account, but then doing that to Auburn as well. So, yeah, their approach is that even though you had the big loss at Miami, knocked them out of the rankings, they're unranked, I think still not receiving any kind of votes or anything like that as far as I know, that they can be in the mix. And it's from the very beginning 2 years ago when I'm looking at the schedule and saying, okay, this is the year. I always said if the Aggies were going to win a division title, it's going to be in an odd year, because that's when Alabama and Auburn come to town. And, next week is Alabama. But I will say this about the Arkansas game. Obviously, the Razorbacks have their full attention. I have not heard anybody talking about, man, can't wait for the Alabama game next week at Kyle Field. I mean, based on the way this series has gone, the way last year went, with the ball off the top of the goalpost, the upright and so forth, 100% Arkansas has the Aggies' attention going into this game. And I'll say this, guys, I know it seems like the Aggies I know and everything, they kind of go, some of them are like, yeah, I like it at AT&T Stadium. I should be home and home. I've really enjoyed this series, and maybe it's just because it's a short road trip every year that we get to look forward to. Sometimes we take the family. One year we did Six Flags and so forth. But it's actually something I've looked forward to every year, so I'm kind of going to miss it when it's gone after next year as well.
I don't think you're the only one that'll feel that way. Brent, as we close you out here, and we appreciate you joining us on the McClarty-Daniel hotline. Heard Jimbo Fisher compare KJ Jefferson to Matt Jones earlier this week. Matt, of course, tied with KJ right now for the most touchdowns accounted for in Razorback history. I mean, we saw in the last game the impact that he had. Unfortunately, had that fumble. How is Texas, how is Durkin, how is that defense going to try and contain him and the rest of the offense tomorrow?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I heard Jimbo comparing to Cam Newton, in terms of saying he's that kind of player. And, and really you haven't seen that yet in terms of what the Aggies have faced. And he is first and foremost on their mind, but then also, as Jimbo and others have mentioned, the addition of Rocket Sanders back into the lineup has certainly given them something else to think about. But that's where all these 5 stars and these big guys on the defensive line are supposed to come into play in terms of being able to try to at least help contain a guy like KJ Jefferson. But, yeah, I've heard his name mentioned a lot this week in terms of, and obviously Jefferson has the idea after what happened last year when he tried to extend the ball over the goal line early, probably, I would guess, quite a bit of revenge on his mind too. And certainly he's experienced in this game as well.
BetOnline is your #1 source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts.